Imagine a simple document, maybe a bicycle manual, or even just a quick company memo. Seems pretty straightforward, right?
Yeah, on the surface.
But what if I told you that lurking beneath the surface of those everyday communications are complex, ethical, and legal questions? Things that can have massive, real-world consequences.
It's absolutely true. Every word, every graphic, every piece of information we put out there carries weight. A lot more than we might think. Understanding that is, well, it's crucial.
Totally agree. Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take your sources and really unpack the most important insights. Today, we're diving deep into the essential world of ethical and legal considerations in technical communication. We're drawing heavily from sources like Markel and Stuart Selber's Practical Strategies for Technical Communication.
And our mission today really is to cut through all that complexity. We want to give you a kind of shortcut to being well-informed. We want to ensure you understand not just what these issues are, but really why they genuinely matter to you. Whether you're, drafting an email, designing a website, or just navigating your professional life.
Yeah, we'll uncover some surprising facts, I think, and definitely equip you with practical strategies to navigate this whole information landscape. So, okay, with that context, where do we even begin to untangle this stuff?
Well, let's start with a really an eye-opening example from the world of bicycle manufacturers.
Okay.
You'll notice on pretty much any bike company's website or, in their manuals, the cyclists are always wearing helmets. Now, part of that is obvious safety.
Sure, safety first. But the real insight here, and this did surprise me when I read it, is how deeply it's tied to product liability. It's not just a friendly suggestion, is it?
Exactly, not at all. If a company's website, say, didn't prominently show cyclists wearing helmets, an injured rider might actually sue later on. They could claim the company sort of implicitly suggested it was safe to ride without one. It makes you realize that even the most innocent-looking image can carry this kind of hidden legal risk. Every visual choice, potentially a minefield.
That really makes you think about all the subtle, everyday pressures we face in technical communication. Like, have you ever felt that urge to maybe exaggerate past accomplishments on a proposal? Just to make your team look a bit better?
Oh, yeah.
Or maybe list people who aren't truly contributing to a project?
Those are definitely some of the common ethical traps we run into daily. Our sources really highlight pressures like presenting unrealistic work schedules,
Yeah.
or feeling like you have to downplay product hazards in a manual.
Right.
There's even the temptation sometimes to manipulate photos to hide product weaknesses. These might seem like small things, little fudges.
Yeah, minor tweaks.
But the real insight here is how these seemingly small manipulations of data or facts can just completely erode trust, and they can lead to genuinely dangerous real-world outcomes, often without anyone realizing the information was compromised in the first place.
Okay, so how do we even begin to structure our thinking around these complex ethical issues? Our sources introduce this really powerful framework. Manuel G. Velasquez's 4 moral standards for ethical thinking. This feels like a good place to start understanding the why behind decisions. First up is rights.
Right. Rights focuses squarely on individuals' basic needs and welfare. So this covers fundamental ethical things like, say, the right to a reasonably safe workplace or the right to safe products, and importantly, clear, honest information about them. What's fascinating here is how universal that might seem, but the interpretation can actually vary wildly across the globe. For instance, some countries view high-quality healthcare as a fundamental right. Others, well, they approach it very differently.
Then there's justice. The standard is all about fairness, right?
I agree.
Specifically how costs and benefits are distributed among people or groups.
Exactly. Think about fair pay, regardless of gender or race, making sure everyone has equal opportunity. Or consider, who should bear the cost of shared infrastructure, something like high-speed broadband. Justice says that those who benefit should contribute proportionally. Or maybe that burdens should be distributed equitably based on need or ability. It's about balance.
Okay. Next, we have utility. This one is focused on achieving the greatest good for the greatest number. Sounds straightforward? Maybe too straightforward.
It does sound simple, but yeah, it can get tricky. Utility demands we consider both the positive and negative effects of an action or a policy on everyone involved. The goal is the best overall outcome.
Right.
But the real insight is realizing how often short-term good can seriously undermine long-term broader good. For example, Layoffs might boost quarterly reports, right? Looks good on paper in the short term,
Sure does.
but they can devastate morale, really hurt long-term productivity, and negatively impact the wider community. So it's
Yeah.
a very delicate balancing act.
Definitely. And finally, care. This standard emphasizes our relationships and our obligations to other people.
Yeah, care suggests that we often have greater responsibilities to those closest to us, like, our family, our colleagues, community members. It's about those personal connections and the moral obligations that come from them. And sometimes this standard gives you very different ethical answers than the other three.
Okay, let's try and apply these. There's this really compelling job scenario in the sources. Imagine you're on a hiring committee, right? 6 applicants. One of them is a close friend who's been really struggling to find a job since graduating. You feel a strong pull to, lobby for them.
Right. Okay, well, if we look at it through the lenses of rights and justice, lobbying for your friend would likely be considered wrong
Why is that?
because all applicants have an ethical right to a fair evaluation process based solely on their qualifications. Favoring a friend directly violates that principle of fairness, of
Right,
justice.
that makes sense. And utility. How does the greatest good principle factor in here?
Utility would probably also conclude that lobbying isn't in the organization's best interest. I mean, the core goal for the company is to hire the most qualified candidate, right? For the benefit of the company as a whole.
Okay.
While your friend's personal need is certainly important, it's not the primary utility consideration for the organization itself.
So care is really the only one of the 4 standards where lobbying for your friend might seem, well, reasonable. That really highlights how powerfully those personal connections can sway our ethical thinking.
Precisely. Care focuses on your relationship, your obligation to your friend. But even then, this raises a really important follow-up question. Should you disclose your relationship?
And the answer is,
A clear yes. Transparency is absolutely key here. The hiring committee has a right to know about your personal connections so they can better evaluate your input, your contributions to the discussion.
right.
In fact, depending on the situation, you might even need to consider recusing yourself from the decision entirely, just stepping back.
Okay, but this gets even deeper. What if your friend is genuinely one of the top 2 candidates? And the other top candidate is also highly skilled, maybe has a degree from some prestigious university. This raises a huge question. Is the goal just to hire the absolute most qualified person on paper? Or is there maybe a broader social obligation to help someone less fortunate?
And this is where the true depth of ethical thinking becomes really profound. Some people would argue, look, you just hire the most qualified candidate, period. End of
Right.
story. Others might bring in a broader social question, something involving human rights, arguing that society perhaps should adequately provide for its less fortunate members, and therefore maybe your friend's need for the job could be a legitimate factor, albeit maybe a secondary one.
So it moves beyond just a technical hiring decision.
Exactly. It becomes a much more complex social dilemma. And there are no easy answers here. None at all.
And while we're talking about rights and obligations, our sources also touch on fundamental employee rights. We often think of, fair wages, safe working conditions, but there's more to it, isn't there?
Absolutely. Beyond those basics, there's things like due process in handling promotions or disciplinary actions. And there's this ongoing, really complex debate around rights like freedom from surveillance or unwarranted intrusion. Think about stuff like drug investigations or undercover investigators in the workplace.
Yeah.
Even ethicists themselves often disagree on these points, which just shows that even seemingly basic rights can have incredibly nuanced interpretations in the workplace.
Okay, moving beyond individual rights then, let's talk about our broader obligations as communicators. First, our obligations to our employer. The primary one seems to be competence and diligence. Basically, you're expected to do your job adequately.
And that includes actually doing the work. It sounds incredibly basic, I know. But a Salary.com survey mentioned in the source found that more than half of employees admit to wasting up to an hour a day on non-work activities.
Wow, an hour a day.
Yeah. So competence isn't just about having the skills, it's about applying them diligently and honestly, showing up and doing the job.
Then there's generosity. This one sounded a little unusual to me as a professional obligation, but it's really about sharing knowledge and expertise with colleagues.
Exactly. It means proactively offering recommendations, thoughtfully answering questions to help the whole organization achieve its goals. It's about fostering a collaborative, supportive environment where knowledge flows freely for the collective good, basically.
Honesty and candor are obviously huge. This isn't just about, not stealing office supplies. It's about actively reporting problems, maybe with product quality or safety. Our sources list some particularly um, insidious, deceptive practices that you might not even realize are happening.
They do. Trimming is one. That refers to smoothing out irregularities in research data to make it look deceptively accurate, more
Yeah.
consistent than it really is.
Okay.
Cooking is another. That's when you only keep the favorable data and conveniently discard the rest that doesn't fit the outcome you want.
Oh, wow.
And then there's forging, just inventing data or entire experiments that never even happened. These aren't just minor fudges. The real danger is how they completely destroy trust and can lead to really dangerous real-world outcomes, like unsafe products, all because the underlying data was messed with.
That's serious stuff.
Yeah.
Confidentiality is also critical, of course. That means protecting privileged information. Things like new product developments, sensitive personnel matters, maybe even financial restructuring plans.
And this extends to avoiding conflicts of interest too, like accepting bribes or kickbacks. Loyalty to your employer also means acting in their best interests, so things like moonlighting, having a second job, if it jeopardizes your objectivity or productivity, those are also red flags.
But this raises an important question. What if your employer is the one acting unethically?
Oh, yes. That's when the concept of whistleblowing comes into play. It's basically the practice of going public with information about serious unethical conduct when, internal channels have failed to address it.
Seems like a big step.
It's a brave and often incredibly difficult step to take. For example, an engineer might blow the whistle if they discover that quality control tests on a company product were being faked. But it definitely comes with significant risks.
Like what?
Well, the Ethics and Compliance Initiative reported back in 2018 that more than 1 in 3 workers who reported misconduct experienced some form of retaliation.
1 in 3. That's sobering.
It really is. That statistic alone tells you just how challenging this path can be.
Okay, so beyond our employers, we also have these profound obligations to the public. That means treating customers fairly and making sure the products and services we communicate about are, safe and effective.
And the statistics here are pretty sobering, too. The U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commission estimated something like 42,000 deaths and over 16 million injuries occur per year just from consumer products in the U.S., and that excludes cars and medications.
That's staggering.
It is. Now, while manufacturers are generally responsible for product safety, they aren't usually liable for totally unforeseen or unpreventable misuse. But it's all about reasonable care and providing crystal clear information to the public.
Got it. And finally, our obligations to the environment. Natural resource depletion, climate change, largely from excessive fossil fuel use. These are pressing global issues.
Absolutely. Preserving the environment is genuinely everyone's responsibility. Government, businesses, individuals, we all have a role.
And as communicators.
As communicators, we should be reporting potential environmental damage if we see it, and absolutely avoid cutting corners just to save costs. Disposing of hazardous waste properly, for instance, costs more in the short run than just, say, dumping it.
Sure.
But the long-term cost to the environment is measurable. Our sources really drive that point home. It's a long-term obligation.
Okay, so we've covered the ethical minefield. Now let's turn to the other side of this coin, the legal landscape, which often overlaps with ethics in some pretty surprising ways. Let's start with copyright law. It seems really crucial to understand the distinction here. Plagiarism is an ethical issue, right? It's about not giving credit for someone else's words or ideas.
Exactly. Whereas copyright infringement is strictly a legal issue. That's when you illegally copy someone's creative work, whether it's written, documents, pictures, music, whatever.
Okay.
And a key legal concept here is work made for hire. Basically, if you create something as an employee on the job, your employer often owns the copyright, not you personally.
That's important.
Very. And another common misconception is thinking you can just copy information from your own company's website and reuse it in other company publications without getting permission. Legally, you actually can't do that without proper clearance internally.
Right, okay. And speaking of copyright, courts have developed these key factors to figure out what counts as fair use. That crucial legal exception allowing limited use of copyrighted material without permission. It sounds complex, but our sources break it down into 4 practical things to consider. First, the purpose and character of the use.
Right. This basically asks, is your use for profit or is it nonprofit? Is it educational or is it commercial? Generally, nonprofit educational uses get scrutinized a bit less carefully, leaning more towards being considered fair use.
Okay. Second, the nature of the copyrighted work itself.
Yeah, so is it factual information like maybe a news report? Or is it a highly creative work like a novel or a song? Factual stuff is generally seen as more open to fair use than something very creative.
Third, the amount and substantiality of the portion used. This one seems pretty straightforward, just how much you took.
It is, mostly. Is it a small passage from a big book, say 200 words? Or is it a huge chunk of a short, maybe 500-word brochure? The more you use, especially if it's considered the heart of the work, the less likely it is to be fair use.
Makes sense. And finally, the effect of your use upon the potential market for the copyrighted work.
This is a really critical factor. The question is, would your use harm the original author's ability to profit from their work? Fair use should really never undermine the commercial market for the original material. If your use could potentially replace sales of the original, that's a definite red flag for the courts.
It's also worth briefly mentioning Creative Commons, right? It seems like a trend that's helping simplify some of these permission issues.
Yes, absolutely. Creative Commons is a growing movement where copyright owners can basically proactively specify how their work can be used, often allowing for much more flexible use without needing to track down the copyright holder for individual permission every single time. It's a great benefit for creators and users alike, really helps streamline legitimate sharing.
So what are the best practices then for navigating copyright? Our sources seem to advise sticking to fair use guidelines, definitely seeking permission if you're in doubt, and always citing sources accurately, which, as we discussed, is also a big ethical obligation.
Couldn't agree more. And for any truly complex questions, don't hesitate to consult legal counsel. Seriously, when in doubt, get expert advice. It can save a lot of trouble down the line.
Good advice. Now let's shift gears slightly and talk about the role of corporate culture. Our sources really emphasize that strong ethical cultures lead to significantly fewer problems overall, while weak cultures, well, they can breed pressure to commit misconduct and, unfortunately, less reporting of problems, often with retaliation against those brave enough to actually speak up.
Absolutely. And companies can take specific proactive steps to really improve their ethical culture. It starts at the top. Leaders need to visibly set the right tone. Supervisors need to consistently set good examples. And peers can play a role too, supporting ethical employees. Formal policies, like a code of conduct, are also absolutely crucial.
Right. And what's particularly insightful from the sources is that an effective code of conduct isn't just any code. It has three major characteristics. First, it protects the public, first and foremost, not just the organization itself. Second, it's specific and comprehensive in its guidance. And third, crucially, it's enforceable with clear penalties. It can't just be, nice words on a page somewhere.
Exactly. So many codes are just too vague to be truly useful in practice. An effective code focuses on specific behaviors, making sure people adhere to laws, avoid discrimination, protect intellectual property, prevent bribery, things like that. It needs to be a living, breathing document that actually guides everyday decisions.
Okay, let's talk social media. This is another massive area that has just exploded in recent years, creating a whole new set of ethical and legal challenges, mostly because it's just so pervasive now, in both our work and private lives.
It certainly has. The numbers are telling. Surveys show nearly 80% of employers now have social media policies in place, and over a third actually block access to social media during work hours. Yeah, and more than half have reported some kind of misuse by employees, and over 70% have actually taken disciplinary action because of it. Yet at the same time, the Pew Research Center found employees use social media for breaks, sure, but also for solving work problems and connecting with coworkers. So it really is a double-edged sword.
And here's an interesting legal nuance. The National Labor Relations Board, the NLRB, has ruled that criticizing an employer about working conditions, whether you do it online or offline, is actually protected speech. But just general defamation against your employer, that's not protected. So you really have to be careful what you post, because once it's out there, well, you've essentially lost control of it.
Totally. And our sources offer some really practical guidelines for navigating social media ethically and legally. One key piece of advice is to always keep your private social media accounts completely separate from any company-sponsored ones. Seems obvious, but important.
Good point.
And as maybe boring as it sounds, always read and understand the terms of service for any platform you use. They contain important rules.
I also found it interesting that they recommend avoiding self-plagiarism, which is basically republishing your own content as if it's new for different company publications. Hadn't thought of that one.
Yeah, it's a subtle one. And then, of course, the more obvious ones. Do not defame anyone, which covers both libel, which is written, and slander, which is spoken. Don't live stream or quote from meetings without getting explicit permission first.
Right.
And remember, the Federal Trade Commission rules on false endorsements. If you have any kind of affiliation with a product or company you're promoting, you must disclose it clearly.
Transparency again.
Exactly. Beyond that, the usual common sense applies. Don't impersonate anyone. And obviously avoid infringing on copyrighted materials or trademarked names or logos. It really boils down to being transparent and respectful online, just as you would be offline.
Okay, finally, let's touch on communicating ethically across different cultures. U.S. companies export literally trillions in goods and services, but ethical norms and legal obligations can vary so widely from country to country. This creates some truly unique challenges.
Oh, they absolutely do. Different countries often have fundamentally different ethical beliefs and, crucially, different laws. Take the example of, say, sexual discrimination in the workplace. Ethicist Thomas Donaldson came up with this idea of a moral minimum.
Okay, what's that?
He suggests companies operating abroad are ethically obligated not to actively reinforce existing discrimination, like by explicitly excluding women from product photos in a market where that might be the norm.
Right, don't make it worse.
Exactly. However, he also argues they aren't necessarily obligated to directly challenge the prevailing prejudices head-on or, say, portray women in ways that would deeply offend local standards. It's a very fine and often very complex line to walk.
Yeah, sounds tricky.
Yeah.
And the differing legal landscapes must be a major factor, too. You just can't assume what's okay here is okay everywhere else.
Precisely. You absolutely must adhere to the federal and regional laws of other countries you operate in, and they can often be much stricter than what we might be used to in the U.S. For example, hazardous product laws in the European Union are typically far more stringent. Exporting goods means understanding and complying with this complex, constantly shifting web of international regulations.
So after all that, what does this all mean for you, the listener, as you navigate your professional world? We've really seen how deeply interconnected ethical and legal considerations are in, well, pretty much all forms of technical communication, from internal memos right up to global marketing materials. It's clearly not just about memorizing a bunch of rules, but about really understanding these core principles like rights, justice, utility, and care, and then consciously applying them.
Yeah, critical thinking is just so essential today. In a world completely saturated with information, you constantly need to ask yourself, are my actions not only legal, but are they also ethical? And how might they be perceived by others? What are the potential impacts?
So, as you move forward, maybe consider that writer's checklist we briefly touched on from the sources. Did I tell the truth? Did I abide by the relevant laws? By my company's code of conduct? The social media policy? What really stands out to you from our deep dive today?
You know, perhaps the most challenging ethical dilemmas are the ones that force us to balance these competing responsibilities, like that student tuition case mentioned in our sources, where maybe an entire student body ends up subsidizing a plagiarism detection service just to catch a relatively small number of bad actors. How would you approach that, knowing the cost implications for everyone involved?
It's definitely a complex world out there. And your ability to navigate it ethically and legally seems more valuable now than maybe ever before.